Good morning and welcome to the Farming Today This Week podcast with me, Charlotte Smith. In this episode, rain, waterlogged fields and flooding misery for farmers.
I'm presently walking through a field of winter wheat here, and I'm just coming to a bit here that's kind of lying underwater.
There are hundreds and hundreds of acres of prime arable land underwater.
Flood is bad, whatever the flood, but this one's quite cruel in a way that it just creeps up. You can see it coming. There's nothing you can do about it.
And we'll hear from the boss of the Environment Agency on a large-scale natural flood protection project.
The key part about this one is to do with river restoration, improving flood resilience and river quality.
First, though, artificial intelligence, AI. It's starting to influence many aspects of our lives, and farming is no exception. This week, we looked at how the technology is being used in agriculture and how it might help in the future. Bristol Vet School's farm is trialling AI and CCTV cameras to spot changes in behaviour among its dairy cows, asking if it can pick up potential issues sooner than human herd managers and so improve animal welfare. Well, the project is publicly funded by UK Research and Innovation. Marie Lennon found out more from Windhurst Farms manager Ben Hunt.
On a day-to-day level, we've got 200 cows of milk yielding sort of 42 litres a cow a day, so reasonably productive.
And we can just about hear the whirring in the background. You're on your second milking of the day, so 3 milkings a day. Professor Andrew Dowsey, tell me a bit about the work that happens here that you're involved with.
This platform now has 60 CCTV cameras that are there.
Oh, you wouldn't even notice,
You wouldn't
would
even
you?
notice it until you start looking.
Okay, there's one.
They're placed to cover the whole barn area, to monitor essentially the life course of each individual animal, and particularly to characterise their behaviours and social behaviours. From an artificial intelligence perspective, the last few years we've developed methods to identify each individual based on their coat pattern, but that allows us automatically to track each individual across our camera network. And from that, we've developed new techniques to recognise different behaviours that they're doing when they're interacting with each other, whether they're doing it in an affiliative, they're grooming each other, or whether it's a more agonistic interaction. The aim of the platform is to link that to various outcomes, productivity, welfare in particular, even potentially emissions going forward. So you can see whether one of the cows is very social one day, and then a few days later they've withdrawn a bit from the social network, and that might be indicative that they're coming down with some infection.
Ben, what do you think? Is it helpful from a kind of bottom line point of view?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, there are endless examples from forever of those really skilled herdsmen that can spot a sick cow a mile off. It's absolutely key to be able to pick up disease or infections really quickly, in terms of effective treatment and trying to, yes, keep the cow productive but maximise her welfare and potentially use less antibiotics. And if we can see that from monitoring behaviour, huge implications that could have from a cost saving.
Into the office, away from the cows. What are we looking at on this screen here?
We are looking at essentially a big brother view of our cow shed. We can see if there are behavioural changes that predate actual clinical signs. Most technologies on the market are looking for clinical signs, but what we're looking for here are there subtle behavioural changes that predate those clinical signs, so the farmer can potentially act sooner.
In reality, how likely is it that a dairy farmer just operating on a commercial basis could utilise this technology?
We are particularly hoping that this will transform into a product in a few years' time that could be used by dairy farmers. We've been running this data collection for a little under a year now, but obviously in a few years' time we'll have a full life cycle for a cow, and that opens up lots of interesting research in welfare research, in the biological research, but also into improved artificial intelligence too.
Professor Andrew Dowsey from the University of Bristol there. As I say, we spent the whole week talking about AI, so just search for Farming Today on BBC Sounds to hear more. Now, you really don't need me to tell you this. It has been wet. Very wet. And while we may have a respite this weekend, if you can honestly call a forecast which includes snow and ice a respite, more rain is forecast for next week. After what was the wettest January on record for some, more rain means more problems for farmers, from flooding and waterlogged fields to worries about the impact on this year's harvest and their bottom lines. Well, this week we heard from farmers at different ends of the country. Let's start in the usually relatively dry east of Scotland, which so far this year has experienced record-breaking rainfall. Here's Jack Stevenson on his farm near Banff at the start of the week.
I'm presently walking through a field of winter wheat here. The ground is very soft, and I'm just coming to a bit here that's kind of lying underwater. As you can hear, the ground's just like quicksand. Fingers crossed it does dry up, because we are on a drier farm, but there's certainly a lot of fields lying underwater in Aberdeenshire.
Well, Jack, who's chair of the National Farmers Union Scotland's Combinable Crops Committee, retreated to his warm, dry kitchen to talk to Anna Hill about those conditions on Aberdeenshire farms.
The rivers are at bursting point at the moment, and we've a lot of farmland next to rivers are flooded, and the ground can't cope with any more. It's just going to end up spilling over into lower lying parts of the country. So it's wet, miserable, damp, dark and horrible.
How does that affect crops which are already in the field?
If they're underwater, like winter wheat or winter oilseed rape, 3 or 4 days underwater, more than that, and they will just rot out. And probably if it's a whole field, yes, that could mean a huge financial loss to the farmer. Whether he re-sows that field in the springtime, a lot of it will be parts of fields that'll have to be re-sown, or it just has a knock-on effect for the rest of the field. But it's crops came through the winter, they're looking very well, and we had quite a good November, December. But since the turn of the year, with the snow in January and now this continual rain, it's beginning to certainly take its toll on the winter crops.
The crops that haven't rotted, could they get back on track? And the ones that you sow in the patches that need re-sowing, will they catch up?
Yeah, I mean, as long as the crop's not underwater, the winter crops, as the wheat and the winter barley, they were established very well, and they were actually coming through the winter quite well. So they will get back on track. Yes, if we're having this conversation in the beginning of March, that's when we need to get on with early fertilisers, some herbicides and fungicides. That will have a huge effect on quality of the grain if we can't. But surely we're always optimistic. We'll look on the brighter side that it will dry up. But the areas of crop that a farmer maybe has to patch in, they're never going to be the same. It'll be too late for a winter wheat crop to be sown up here. Probably have to patch it in with maybe a cover crop or some spring barley, but they'll never be the same yield as the ones that's been sown in the winter time.
What are you doing, Jack? Are you sitting on the sofa watching the Winter Olympics? Or are you actually getting out there and doing things?
Well, Anna, no, we've a mixed farm, so cattle need to be fed twice a day, and there's lots of workshop jobs at this time of year that we can get on with, machinery maintenance, and there's office work as well, crop planning and doing the dreaded VAT. So there's most farmers, I would like to say, are still quite busy, especially if they've got livestock.
Farmer Jack Stevenson there near Banff. Well, in Somerset, tens of thousands of acres of low-lying moors and levels remain flooded. For weeks, communities have been coping with impassable roads and watching anxiously to see whether the frantic pumping operation is keeping the water at bay. Some homes have already been flooded. Well, on Thursday, I caught up with James Winslade, who farms near the village of Moorland. The vast majority of his land has been underwater for nearly 3 weeks now. He updated me on how close that water is getting to his buildings.
It's all round me. So I'm sat in the yard by a silage pit in my telehandler, and to the right of me, the other side of the buildings, there is water, and to the left of me, the same. So on a little strip of green down through a sea of water.
How close is the water to the village? Because you're near Moorland, aren't you?
Yeah, so we're cut off. There's a metre of water between myself and the village. They've put extra pumps in this week. They've dug around a bridge that was holding water back on the main drain heading towards Northmoor pumping station. situation. So they've dug around that one. They're looking at digging around another bridge just to try and get water to the pumps. One house was flooded at the beginning of the week. Another one is about to flood. And then there's 3 or 4 other houses at immediate risk. So we're just hoping that the agency is nearly getting control again. But fortunately, it hasn't rained today. And we didn't have as much rain on Tuesday at the last yellow weather warning storm that came through.
And this has been going on for weeks now, hasn't it? Which must be a strain for everybody, farmers and everyone who lives there.
Everybody, yeah. It's not like a flash flood, fast-moving water coming in and you're sweeping your houses out the next day. Flood is bad, whatever the flood, but this one's quite cruel in the way that it just creeps up. You can see it coming. There's nothing you can do about it. And you're just sort of hoping that the agency get on top of it, because every drop of water here has to be manually pumped back into the river. So, we're not like a normal floodplain would be, where it'd come in at the top and then go out at the bottom. It takes months for it to go away. This water here now, 3 weeks on Sunday it's been with me, it's going to take a month and a half to 2 months to get rid of.
What will this mean in the medium term for your ability to farm?
Oh, it's going to put a massive strain, as if farming wasn't a massive strain, under a massive strain already. It's going to put a massive strain. We're going to be short of grass. We're going to be short of crops. We're going to have to physically keep the animals in longer to wait for the grass to sort of either we re-drill grass or the older pastures to recover. Grass seed is £100 an acre now, so we'll have to do that, which we'd already put in all our herbal lays and our wildflower mixes for the environment, which that'll all have to be done again. So it's a huge cost.
James Winslade, who this week played host to the Minister for Water and Flooding, Emma Hardy. Yesterday, she talked to Justin Webb on the Today programme about that visit and said that the government's new flood funding formula should help.
It's so difficult for farmers. I was speaking to one on Tuesday. I went down to Somerset and he took me in the back of his trailer and the tractor around to show how, I wouldn't even say waterlogged. It was like a lake, the fields around his farm. And he was explaining to me the real difficulty he had because he grazed cattle. So at the moment, they're obviously inside. But the problem is by the time the water goes, the grass hasn't had time to grow. So he's got to replant the grass. And he was explaining all of this situation to me.
And no insurance as well for crop damage. That's the other thing they said.
Yeah, it is very difficult. So I've been having conversations with the farming ministers to see what we can do. I mean, when it comes to the new flood funding formula that comes in from April, which is one that we've designed under this government, it does look in the formula about the impact on farmland, whereas previously it was more the number of properties impacted determined where you would spend money for flood defences. So for the first time, farmland will be taken into account, but obviously that's the way the formula is designed from April. So I think, I do recognise it's really difficult. And I heard that, as I say, very passionately from the farmer I was talking to on Tuesday. And it's something I'm trying to have conversations with about what can be done, because, climate change is real. And we are going to continue to see these patterns of increased wet winters and very, very dry summers. And they've just gone through a drought in summer and now they're facing flooding in winter.
The Minister for Water and Flooding, Emma Hardy. The Country Land and Business Association, the CLA, says the financial pressure caused by winter flooding following on from that summer drought, at a time when arable and milk prices are also poor, is taking its toll. Some farms, they say, are having to change what they're doing to cope. Joe Evans, the Deputy President of the CLA, farms organic livestock on the Herefordshire-Worcestershire border. He spoke to Anna.
Right now, the farm is a complete quagmire. Though I would count myself as one of the luckier ones in that we don't rely on arable farming on our farm system here. Driving my son to school this morning around the Worcester bypass, and there are hundreds and hundreds of acres of prime arable land underwater. So it's really grim.
We've had unpredictable weather for some time, haven't we? Have you taken steps to become more resilient to the extremes of wet and dry?
No, it's funny you should say that. I think I've had a conversation with my contract farming partner every year for the last 5 years about what an extraordinary, strange year it's been for weather. So one has to get to a point where you realise this isn't extreme. This is now business as usual as a result of climate change. Well, the answer is yes, in that we are absolutely adopting an extensive farming system and trying to make sure that, we have lower stocking densities to give the ground more time to rest. I think for CLA members that are having to deal with this, whether or not it's adapting or surviving, I mean, that's they're two slightly different ways of looking at the situation. But I know of farmers, certainly in Somerset, that have given up on arable enterprises altogether, such as the frequency of their farms flooding. So, yeah, I mean, the industry is having to face it. This is going to be business as usual, I'm sure, for the foreseeable.
Some people might just shake their fist at the sky and say, oh, this is terrible, I'll curse those clouds. But actually, isn't it for farmers then to take action themselves and say, right, I'm going to change what I'm doing on the farm?
I think there's a bit of that. I think, yes, it's a fair challenge, Anna. I mean, but the action so often requires an underlying policy and regulatory support from government to actually enable them to do it. So one example would be being able to hold water on farm reservoirs. And we've been pushing very hard to get permitted development rights to be able to enable farmers to build on farm reservoirs, which does great things at points of excess like now, and then, of course, holds that water back for us to use at times of scarcity in the summer. But we need a planning system that will enable that to happen. And then I think farmers would crack on. And I also think that it's really important that government properly funds environmental land management schemes to ensure that farmers have the right policy conditions that they can adapt their farming processes to improve the quality of the soils, the draining of those soils, making sure there are winter cover crops so the soil doesn't all get washed away, et cetera, et cetera. It's a whole combination of these measures.
Yeah, that's interesting because those things depend on funding for agri-environment schemes, don't they? And that funding is pretty scarce at the moment.
It seems so, yeah. I mean, it's political choice, isn't it? And I understand that this government has lots of challenging political choices to make. I just feel that the quantum of the agricultural budget in the scheme of wider government spending is very, very small, and the impact can be really huge, not only for farmers, and you could say, well, lucky farmer, but actually the impact on wider society and being able to take steps to be able to hold water back to avoid communities being flooded feels to me like a really good thing that the government should put its resources into.
Joe Evans, the Deputy President of the CLA. Well, the government in England might point to projects it is funding as part of ELM's environmental land management schemes, which replaced the old EU subsidy system and, as we've reported, have been beset with problems. They pay farmers only for the public goods they provide, things like planting trees and rewiggling rivers, both of which can slow the flow of water. Well, this week, a landscape recovery project in Oxfordshire got the official go-ahead. It's part of the government's £500 million fund for long-term, large-scale land management schemes in England, which use a mix of public and private money to provide environmental benefits. The Even Load project in the Cotswolds is being delivered by a cluster group of more than 50 farmers and will work to reconnect floodplains and restore rivers. Marie Lennon was at the launch.
Under a grey duvet sky and relentless winter rain, a group of farmers and members of DEFRA and the Environment Agency have gathered together at, and in some ways because of this river, the River Evenlode that runs through many farms here in the Cotswolds.
And just like the lapwing that we've seen flying over, and a few snipe that have got up, and there's a few swans in the background as well, they're only here because it's wet, right? They're all wading birds. So what we're going to try and do is create that wetness for longer in the season, whilst also creating that landscape sponge that reduces that flood stress downstream.
That's Tim Fields, one of over 50 farmers that are part of this project.
This idea came from a group of farmers that all wanted to connect their habitats up together. The man standing next to me, Tim Coates, suggested we went into landscape recovery, as did a few of the other members of the cluster. The farms that we're working with, we're really targeted what's called the flow pathways, which is where the water hits the ground in a big storm event and flows over the top and enters the ditches, the rivers very quickly, carrying lots of sediment with it. And what we've tried to do is target those areas, hold that water back, changing land use where it's particularly steep, perhaps rewooding some of the slopes, and creating wetlands and so on in strategic places to slow that flow. And then once it's in the river, to reduce that flooding, we're increasing the sinuosity, we're making it wiggly.
It's building resilience in that farm asset, but it's also paying and therefore creating economic resilience. We've got this 20-year contract underwritten by the government and crowding in the private finance as well. Farmers are getting paid for the actual value of the ecosystem service they're providing. I think all the farmers have seen ourselves as farmers. We want to produce healthy food for the population, but we've always been land stewards. But it's also about recognising that therefore we get to make the right choice for the land that we know.
Alan Lovell, Chair of the Environment Agency. We are out in one field as part of this 3,000 hectare project. First of all, why do you think this is a valuable project?
The key part about this one is to do with river restoration, improving flood resilience and river quality. But more importantly, it's the landscape recovery projects are on a scale which can really make a difference, which is so great for biodiversity and real nature extension into areas that have been lost.
Is that the best use of public money right now?
Yes, it's a very important use of public money. If one respects nature and respects all that nature gives us in so many ways. Our calculation is that the economic benefit is actually 8 times what it is going to cost.
How's that worked
in
out?
terms of the government. Some of it is environmental benefit, some of it is farming benefit, and some of it is community benefit. The idea is that the government money should be matched by money from private sources, and will all be looking to make a return on it. So the fact that there is opportunity for private investors gives some support for the idea that the government money will also be a wise investment from which we all will benefit.
And with that in mind, why is it the case that there is a clause in the contract for an opt-out of that funding from DEFRA with a 12-month notice period? I mean, some would say that shows it's not about long-term thinking, and it makes it quite risky for farmers to commit for such a long period over such a huge scale.
It is a very long period. I think that at this early stage of the scheme, though, it is reasonable for the government to set some hurdles along the path and to give the farmers the challenge to make sure that they are keeping up with that. I think it's reasonable not to commit it all absolutely up front, but to say, here's what we're going to give you, but you've got to play your part in that, and then we'll be backing.
Is there a worry, though, that it might make investors feel a little bit edgy?
The early indications are that that's not the case. The proof of the pudding will be in the eating, but I don't think so.
There are many farmers, as you will know, up and down the country who regularly have their fields, which could be productive fields, under feet of water, and they say that they're really forced to allowing their fields to flood to protect infrastructure downstream, or to protect dwellings or villages or whole towns. And they have been crying out to the Environment Agency and to DEFRA to say, we will do this public good, but we should be paid for it. That is what's happening here, but should this approach be taken further around the country to individual farms?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that a lot of farmland is at risk from flooding. We recognise that. We're delighted that DEFRA's latest funding scheme for flood defence will give more credit to all value for money projects as opposed to just the property focus which they have had to date. We do think it's very important that there is more support for farmland that is at risk from flooding. In many cases, the farmers were paid a sum for recognising that their farms would be part of the floodplain. And of course, in many areas, including Somerset and including the Fens, that is their natural state, and there's no way of getting around that. So we will do our best, but it's within the confines and subject to the vagaries of nature, which undoubtedly is getting more challenging in many respects. I completely agree.
Alan Lovell, Chair of the Environment Agency. Do let us know what you think about flooding and indeed drought and what we can do to mitigate. You can email us. We're farming.today@bbc.co.uk. But that's all we have time for. I'm Charlotte Smith. The producer is Beatrice Fenton. And Farming Today this week is a BBC Audio Bristol production.